we look different, we sound different, and we even perceive the world in different ways. But at the core of our being, we all seek the same things. We seek acceptance, we seek inclusion, and we seek community. Individuals with disabilities are no different in that regard. They seek the same things that we do, but what can be difficult is the accessibility to all the amazing things that our world has to offer. You see, my friends, we live in a world where 1 in 5 of us has a disability. These are our neighbors, our friends, or perhaps even a loved one. But out of this group, only 20% have a visible disability. The remaining 80% have invisible disabilities. But what is an invisible disability? Well, an invisible disability is one where the person affected by it looks no different than me or you. They could have post-traumatic stress disorder, early onset dementia, autism, just to name a few. They want the same things that we do, but what can be difficult for them is the way they perceive and experience the world. You see, the majority of them have sensory processing issues. Bright lights, loud noises, certain smells, and large crowds can not only be overwhelming to them, but also sometimes physically painful. How do I know this? Well, my son is one of them. He has autism. You see, before his diagnosis, this was a world that we were very unfamiliar with. We did not realize that being autistic could potentially limit his accessibility to all the things that he enjoyed doing. For instance, going to the park, to the pool, or even to a museum. But all that changed one summer. You see, Abram had always loved museums. He loved all the exhibits there, particularly the ones about mummies. But he also struggled with sensory issues. And because of this, you might see him sometimes jump up and down, flap his hands, or sometimes even let out a shout or two to cope with this. One summer, we took him to a museum with a mummy exhibit. He was so excited. Walking into that lobby, it was very loud and very crowded. And because of all this and his excitement, Abram was being a little extra bouncy, when suddenly we were approached by a security guard. The guard told us that if we could not get our son under control, we would be asked to leave. Explaining to him that Abram was autistic, the guard did not believe us, but said that he did not look autistic. And because of this, we would have to leave. You see, my friends, stories like ours, unfortunately, are becoming more and more common each and every day. Such is the life of someone living with an invisible disability. Routine outings are difficult, not only from the sensory standpoint, but also from the social prejudice standpoint, because we as a community have only equated disability with the visible. Because of this, a lot of these individuals and their families end up withdrawing from communities and living lives of isolation. We need to change this. We need to rethink accessibility in order to truly create a community of acceptance and inclusion. But before we can do this, we need to first examine what accessibility truly means. See, for the longest time, accessibility has only been equated to physical access to a particular space. So, for example, accessible doors and accessible ramps. But accessibility needs to go beyond that. It needs to encompass the entire experience, thus creating a welcoming environment for everyone. But how do we do this? Where do we begin? We begin with sensory-friendly events. These are events where all the noxious stimuli has been removed from the environment. So you might see no harsh lighting, no loud sounds, and smaller crowds at these events. While these events are a great initial first step, they have some significant limitations. Firstly, they're normally only catered to the autistic community, which is great, but still leaves out a lot of people with sensory issues. Secondly, they're also limited to time and place, because more often than not, these are one-off events. And finally, they also miss about educating the general community about sensory processing issues during these events. So as you can see, we need to take the next step. We need to move beyond sensory-friendly into sensory inclusion. But what is the difference between sensory-friendly and sensory inclusion? The best way to inform you about this is with an example. Imagine for a minute, you walk into a restaurant, it's very crowded and it's very loud. You walk up to the host or hostess and you tell them about your sensory issues. They look at you with a blank stare and say, well, we would love to accommodate you, but we don't have that ability to today. But if you come back next Tuesday, between the hours of 10 and 11 in the morning, that's when we have our sensory-friendly dining hour. Now imagine walking into that same restaurant, talking to that same host and hostess, and telling them about your sensory issues, but this time, a look of recognition. They give you a sensory bag with noise-canceling headphones and proceed to seat you. That, my friends, is sensory inclusion. You see, sensory inclusion creates daily accessibility. It educates the general community so that we can truly create a culture of acceptance and inclusion. And in addition to this, it's also easier for a business to execute because only minor modifications are needed to the flow of business. Take, for example, the Cleveland Cavaliers of the NBA. Now, the Cavaliers have held a ton of sensory-friendly events, but they made the move to become sensory inclusive this year. They did this because of a boy named Carson. See, Carson is a boy that loves sports, but because of his sensory issues, he does not get to attend many sporting events. One sensory-friendly event, his parents decided to take him. Walking into the arena, they were immediately accosted by security. You see, Carson is a non-verbal artist. He communicates with an iPad that has an external speaker affixed to his person. This iPad is not only his voice, but also his lifeline to the world. Not recognizing this, the security guard was extremely condescending and demeaning, demanding that Carson remove his device. This effectively stripped Carson of not only his voice, but also his dignity. When the Cavaliers found out about this, they were determined not to let this happen ever again. Working with our nonprofit, KultureCity, we taught them about sensory processing issues. We gave them the tools to better serve their guests that had those issues. We provided them with sensory bags that contained fidget toys and noise-canceling headphones. And we also worked with them to create sensory-friendly areas in the arena, places where people could go to if things got a little too overwhelming. By becoming sensory inclusive, the Cavaliers galvanized their community. They made the arena a place of refuge where all could come and be accepted and included. So you see, my friends, becoming sensory inclusive can truly change lives. It can transform communities, but we need to take that next step. We need to move beyond the visible into the invisible, and we need to rethink accessibility. Then, and only then, can we truly create communities that are accepting and inclusive for everyone. Because deep down inside, despite our external differences, we all seek the same things. We seek acceptance, we seek inclusion, and we seek community. Thank you.